Good afternoon, dear colleagues and attendees. We're beginning the panel session of the Dissertation Board for the defense of the thesis by Kirill Aksenov. The degree is the Candidate of Political Sciences, specialization 10-0110, journalism. The topic is the online media as a factor of extreme political process in the Middle East. By the decree of St. Petersburg State University as of the 1st of March 2019, I, Professor Igor Bohin, Doctor of Political Sciences, St. Petersburg State University, was appointed Chair of the Dissertation Board. Allow me to introduce my colleagues, members of the Dissertation Board. Ilya Bykov, Doctor of Political Sciences, St. Petersburg State University. Yuri Kluyev, Doctor of Political Sciences, St. Petersburg State University. Alevtina Shevchenko, Doctor of Political Sciences, the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. Dmitry Strovsky, Doctor of Political Sciences, Ariel University, Israel. I'd like to highlight that under the federal law, as of the 23rd of August 1996, on the federal law on science and state scientific and technical policy, St. Petersburg University is entitled to confer its own academic degrees. The corresponding order number 6821/1 on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg University was issued on the 1st of September 2016, hereinafter referred to as the order. According to the order, the panel session is valid providing 2/3 of the appointed board members are present. The total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. Today, the Dissertation Board consists of 5 people, 5 of which are present. Therefore, we have a quorum. Let me specify the agenda. The panel discussion will not exceed 2 hours. Item number 1. The chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements, 5 minutes. Item 2. The candidate's presentation with an overview and findings of the research, 15 minutes. Item 3. Questions to the candidate regarding the presentation, no more than 2 minutes for each question. The candidates reply to the questions. Item 4. Reports on the thesis from the members of the board. Members of the board are requested to provide critical remarks and questions, no more than 10 minutes per person. Item 5. The chair's report on the thesis. 6. The candidate's comments about their reports on the thesis, no more than 15 minutes. Item 7. Questions from the audience. The floor will be given to the non-board attendees of the panel session. They can give a brief account of their ideas and or ask questions to the candidate about the research. No more than 5 minutes per person. It is necessary to fill in the registration form and give their full name before the talk. Item 8. The candidate's comments about the talks given by non-members of the board, no more than 5 minutes. Item 9. Presentation of the candidate's thesis supervisor, no more than 3 minutes. Number 10. A 5-minute break before the open balloting on conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. The discussion of the members of the Dissertation Board of the results of the defense is not broadcast. Item 11. Open balloting, vote counting and recording the results in the minutes of the session. Item 12. Deciding upon conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. And finally, the candidate's closing speech, no more than 2 minutes. Before we proceed with the agenda, I kindly ask you to switch off your mobile phones. Let me announce that the panel session of the Dissertation Board is being recorded and broadcast on the internet and interpreted into English. So we are beginning the panel session, and our first agenda is the overview of the documents submitted by the candidates. Thesis by Kirill Aksenov was submitted in conformity with the requirements for the academic degree of the Candidate of Political Sciences. This specialization is 10-0110, journalism. The topic is the online media as a factor of extreme political process in the Middle East. The Dissertation Board was set up by the order of the SPBU Academic Secretary. The candidate has submitted the following documents to the SPBU Academic Secretary: an application to Professor Nikolai Kropachev, Rector of St. Petersburg University, on the approval of the thesis for defense, submitted on the 24th of January 2019. Report of the thesis supervisor, Professor Nikolai Wabush, Doctor of Political Sciences in Petersburg State University. A list of published work containing 3 items which describe the research findings. All of them are published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science. Letter of verification issued by St. Petersburg State University and satisfying that the candidate was enrolled on a full-time postgraduate program. Field 420601, Mass Media and Information and Library Science, and has successfully passed all the qualifying exams. Document 5, expert statement from St. Petersburg State University on submitting the thesis for defense, approved by Sergei Aplonov, St. Petersburg University Vice Rector for Research. Thesis in Russian and English, a printed version with a manuscript copyright and a digital copy. The thesis formatting and reference list comply with all the relevant state standards. The above-mentioned documents comply with Item 12 of Section 3, Submission and Defense, of the Order on Granting Academic Degrees in St. Petersburg State University. So let's now focus on the next item on the agenda, and the floor is given to the candidate. Good afternoon, distinguished members of the board and attendees. I'd like to focus on the subject of my research. You can see that on the slide. It's the influence of online journalism on the extreme political process in the Middle East. Evidence from the civil war in the Syrian Arab Republic. This is a continuous extreme political process and involves more stakeholders and parties than any other modern extreme political process. It is so complicated because it includes several political conflicts and many political groups. What was important for us is that during this process there were a few changes in the foreign policy of the Russian Federation. We started our study back in 2013. It got exceptionally relevant after the active support of the current leadership of the Russian Federation. More active efforts for the Aleppo and an increasing confrontation of online mass media in 2016. So the purpose of the dissertation was to identify the patterns of functioning of the online media in the extreme political process, which will allow to specify the level of involvement of the online media, Sana, Al Jazeera and BBC in the civil war in the Syrian Arab Republic. The objectives of the study: to describe the influence of journalism on modern political process at the backdrop of globalization and growing informatization. Number two, to provide our own model of how local extreme political process arose. Number three, to specify major trends of the interaction between online media and political power in extreme political process, and to evaluate prospects of their development in the Middle East. Number four, to identify the specifics of the functioning of the online media during the civil war in the Syrian Arab Republic. Political processes are regarded as actions and counteractions within a political system, the behavior of the subjects of politics. This is the approach we take in our study. Political subjects include also online media. The definitions are provided on the slide. Extreme political processes have specific features which allow to differentiate between such processes as revolution, rebellion, revolt, war, uprising, military coup, civil war, and war. They have their specific features and show how people fight for power. More detailed information can be found on the relevant pages of the study. The extreme political process arises due to the emergence and worsening of political process. The influence of foreign states, the emergence and the way extreme political processes go is influenced by a number of factors: national, religious, and economic. When we speak about online media, we focus on two major things. Online media can give rise to hatred, increasing the negative effect of other factors, to foster turbulence and confrontation at the early steps of extreme political process. Online journalism provides society with relevant political information. It can affect political process. Political impact and the role of media in different parts of the world are interrelated. Announcements made by politicians go public, unlike telephone negotiations and conversations. Journalists are active and their messages go online immediately. Hence, there is a smaller distance between politicians and general public. Social networks can negatively affect current journalism practices because there lack substantiation and fair critical review. Journalism works of online media make up a certain online chronicle that can be critically reviewed. Here we speak about the accessibility of information about relevant political events. Political processes are not transparent, especially when it comes to national interests and security. The functioning of online media has given rise to a growing confrontation between politicians for their place in the online media space, because it gives them tools of influence. Political journalism and online media in particular can make their audience more sympathetic or create a negative attitude towards some aspects of extreme political process. Online media have symbolic power. However, their owners or politicians can use them to exert control or put pressure. On this slide, you see various aspects of mediatization. Online media can enroll in communication. This is especially important when political leaders cannot engage in face-to-face conversation due to a military or political confrontation. There is another impact that online media can create, such as, for example, narcotization. It's when a person's consciousness is filled with information so much that he grows lethargic. This can create an illusory sense of participation. Online media can also cover the so-called pseudo-events. The time of consuming online use is growing, which is especially attractive for those involved in extreme political process. Media logic is a system of criteria which allows to choose relevant materials. The criteria are described in some detail on pages 60 from 63. Journalists can describe the events from different angles, and they can also refer to the so-called information and psychological confrontation. The four major methods to affect the audience are given on pages from 70 to 76. There are four of them. Due to these methods, they can manage their audiences and create the desired perception in the audience. Politicians have to have access to different local and regional mass media to manage their audience when it comes to extreme political process. If we analyze information space of Middle East, then the choice of online media is limited. On the one hand, it's not that important for the political process if we consider the quality of materials. On the other hand, there is a certain lack of information in the communication information space. There is a lack of English versions of materials. This can impede the consumption of information by foreign media. If materials are regular and they are submitted by foreign media, then this can affect the possibility of politicians to create a desired effect, thus giving rise or decreasing the attention of their audiences to events and issues, as well as their possibility to affect emotional state of their audience. Our study of Sana, Al Jazeera and BBC revealed that online media used during the war in Syria were used to enhance or to undermine the influence of the subject of policy, to shape the desired public opinion. I referred to media metrics and calculated the aggressiveness index. Our study of the Sana from the 1st to the 14th of December 2016 showed that journalists get engaged in information and psychological confrontation. The tools they use are typical. They don't use photographs and video reports. They give positive propaganda of the current power and the Russian Federation. They dehumanize the opposition and describe them as terroristic groupings listed by the UN. They publish negative opinions about the US actions, the actions of Europe, and the states of the Gulf of Persia. In March, when the political behavior of Russia was trying to normalize the situation, the aggressiveness index is in the yellow area. During the Aleppo battle in December 2016, Al Jazeera were engaged in manipulation, rumors and propaganda. The aggressiveness level is 3.2, which is red zone and marks the information danger for the government of Syria and their allies. Russia is no longer regarded by Al Jazeera as a partner. They are described as a non-reliable partner in the Middle East. The same refers to the President Assad and the Syrian Arab Army. In December 2016, BBC also published rumors. In 9 materials out of 78 cases, BBC journalists referred to the posts in social media, given them as a fact, not fiction. The data online media focus on undermining the reputation of Syrian, Russian and Iranian government. They try to affect the global public opinion, and BBC materials did not contribute into the normalization of current political process. Our study of SANI, Al Jazeera and BBC showed that they supported relevant informational materials to their audience. Due to the Aleppo battle, the information confrontation was on the rise. The materials were aggressive. Political subjects which were quoted on the news of the analyzed media corresponded to the images of friends of the current political power. 2 of the 3 online media, Al Jazeera and BBC, used materials of the online media to report using that data and giving that as fact, not fiction. In general, the level of involvement of online media into the extreme political process can be described as average. My conclusion is that journalism of modern online media can affect the normal or abnormal, including extreme political process. They either justify or demonize the actions of the stakeholders, giving more negativism to the images of opponents. This can result in difficulties of the emerging negotiation process. The index of emotional aggressiveness is an important tool to study information state and allows to determine whether information and psychological tools are used. In extreme political processes, online media focus on local and foreign political powers which are interested in political changes in a particular region or state. And they do not focus on the normalization of political process. Now, let's focus on the questions to the candidate. Good afternoon. Mr. Aksenov, my question is as follows. After I have read your thesis and now listening to you giving a presentation, several times you underlined that BBC in particular did not contribute into the normalization of political process. It's not the first time I hear this message in modern media space. the message is that mass media has not made a good job of giving appropriate information or providing appropriate angle. Why is that so? I suppose that the role of online media is to provide a certain number of existing viewpoints on a current issue and then to give their view on these issues. And it's very often the case that their position is not in line with what a certain stakeholder thinks about the issue. So how are they supposed to normalize their position, considering the great number of stakeholders involved in any political process? Professor Strovsky, thank you for your question. I'm not talking about how mass media are supposed to provide their viewpoints. What I meant to say is that a possibility of online media to establish virtual communications between politicians, to be attentive of what different stakeholders speak, and to establish virtual communication between these political parties. I understand that the political process in Syria was marked by certain improvements and worsenings. And there were several cases when the political negotiations were not possible due to the worsening of political attitudes. So here online media can become a platform that gives a stimuli and impetus for the emergence of political negotiations. I see that that's the way it's supposed to be. May I ask one more specifying question? Please keep that. You have to stick to our agenda, 2 minutes per question and answer. I agree that there is a need for a dialogue between mass media and representatives of different political parties, groups and movements. If we lack this dialogue, whatever mass media we take, Arabian or American or Russian mass media, why do we face these issues? Thank you for your question. The dialogue between mass media or between mass media and political powers, I guess that this is due to the concepts that emerged early in the 20th century, and they were gradually making way to the present day. Mass media focuses on their national, regional, local issues. They only focus on their personal security without proper attention to the global dimension. I have a question to your presentation. You had spoke about 4 methods of informational and psychological influence: disinforming, manipulation, rumors, myths, and propaganda. As a follow-up to the previous question, I have a question. Do you really think that these are the 4 methods that journalists stick to only? What about establishing a dialogue, about increasing awareness of their audience and others? Thank you for your question. The case was as follows. I defined these 4 methods so that the practical part of my study can show how these methods are implemented in the online media in our focus. The list is short, but it really shows how powerful these tools are. Mr. Aksenov, you focus on mass media. It's obvious because of the specialization journalism. Did you have a task to provide a typology of terroristic groups showing how active and how extreme they are? You referred to the UN classification. However, we all know that the position of our country is often different. So my question is about a classification. Thank you for your question. I have an understanding of the major political groups when it comes to opposition. However, it was beyond the scope of my research because I thought that it was enough in my study to substantiate the complexity and the continuous character of this conflict in Syria. I thought that was enough. Are there any other questions, colleagues? We don't seem to have any more questions to the candidate. Let us now focus on the reports on the thesis by members of the Dissertation Board and Chair of the Board. The floor is given to Professor Bykov, St. Petersburg State University. Dear colleagues, I'll try to be brief. The presentation showed that the topic of the study is relevant. On the one hand, this is due to the participation of the Russian Federation in peacekeeping missions in Syrian Arab Republic, and it has a global impact, and this issue will be central to scholarly efforts, and this is the advantage of this study because the situation is complex and it's difficult to describe it. The candidate speaks about new forms of political life as they exist in the new dimension of online media. He speaks about hybrid wars. Sometime under these circumstances, the defeat is even more beneficial than victory because the defeated party gains sympathy of the audience, especially when it comes to the Middle East. So the topic is relevant. It focuses on the issues that have been so far little studied. The candidate focuses on transnational, regional and local online media. It focuses on the promotion of political will of a broad spectrum of political actors. Current journalism faces with the task to modernize approaches to start the political process when it comes to the influence on the media. This topic is little studied. Modern society faces mediatization, increasing mediatization. Modern communication technologies penetrate all the aspects of public life, even our today's session of the Dissertation Board. Mass media takes the role of other political institutions, substituting political parties and political movements. This makes the dissertation and the study extremely relevant. Unfortunately, modern political science has a gap when it comes to the aspects described in the thesis. The aims and objectives of the study also seem relevant, and they were successfully achieved by the candidate. The structure of the thesis is in line with the aim and objectives of the study. First, the candidate focuses on the theory and overview of relevant literature, and then proceeds with the analysis of empirical data. Recommendations and research findings, as well as conclusions, are well substantiated. The candidate focused on a relevant amount of statistical data and sources of literature. The methods include content analysis, the aggressiveness index, and some others. Sources of materials include the Syrian edition Sana, Al Jazeera, and BBC. All the research findings are well substantiated for considering the amount of data and the quality of data analyzed by the candidate. The research findings and conclusions are credible. Aksenov reported at several international conferences and were published in reputed, peer-reviewed journals approved by the Ministry of Science of the Russian Federation. So all in all, the study is written at a high level and credible. What makes the study novel? For the first time in Russia, it provides rather ample description of how online mass media functions. It also introduces a new corpora and a large corpora of new sources. The advantages of the study are as follows. It is relevant, it is of practical and theoretical value. The results can be applied to evaluate and provide critical review of the work of online media. The results of the study can become the basis for teaching and training materials in courses in international relations, journalism, political science. The results can be used to enhance editorial policy of Russian online media as well. The study is complete, independent, and comprehensive. Now I'd like to focus on some critical remarks. First off, it's difficult to accept that when providing definition of such terms as revolution, rebellion, revolt, and others, it gives novelty to the research. Apart from that, the candidate fails to analyze such important works by Sorokin as Sociology of Revolution, Stomky, The Sociology of Social Changes, Scotch Polls, States and Social Revolutions, and many others. He fails to provide an overview of research in Orange Revolutions and the Arab Spring, including the works of Zizi Papacherizi, who visited our university last year and made a presentation at the opening of an important conference. Secondly, the content analysis does not look complete. The author says that he analyzed 383 information materials from Sana, 481 publications by Al Jazeera, and 63 materials of BBC. We see that there is a huge difference in number of materials analyzed by the candidate. And here we have a question: why did the candidate prefer these particular mass media sources? Why didn't he focus on Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and others? What about including Russian media, for example, Sputnik or Russia Today? The same refers to the index of aggressiveness. The candidate doesn't provide an overview of the methodology of calculating the index of aggressiveness. He refers to his own publication. One more thing is that the words negative and aggressive are used as synonyms. Thirdly, practical recommendations from journalists with the focus on political issues can make a contribution to normalize extreme political process. However, all these recommendations can also be used to describe any normal political process. Recommendation number 1: at gatekeeping and choosing the agenda, journalists have to base their choice on the position of social responsibility when choosing which politicians to cover in their materials. Another important methods that the candidate failed to use are the interviews with journalists who write for online media. By and large, my critical remarks somewhat undermine the general quality of the dissertation, yet the dissertation by Kirill Aksenov is in line with all the major requirements set forth in the relevant decree of St. Petersburg State University, and Kirill Aksenov can be awarded the academic degree of the Candidate of Political Sciences, provided the panel session of the board is a success. Now the floor is given to Professor Kirill from St. Petersburg State University. Thank you, distinguished chair, dear members of the board, Mr. Kirill and attendees. To save time, I'll now focus on the text of my report. The thesis by Kirill Aksenov focuses on the online media as a factor of extreme political process in the Middle East. He focuses on the state of communication information space in Syrian Arab Republic and around it under the condition of civil war, which has different tactics and tools between the parties involved in the conflict. The topic is relevant because this process involves several political parties representing different states and countries worldwide. Political actors and state leaders are not the only powers. Some power is also attributed to mass media, online media is particular. Empirical data are materials from Sana, Al Jazeera and BBC. The data is analyzed through content analysis. The candidate focuses on post-truth, propaganda, and other methods to affect the audience. These methods are used by mass media, and very often mass media reports the same event from different angles. Mass media, of course, is influenced by political stakeholders and statesmen and leaders of certain states and countries. In the 21st century, mass media is marked by the following characteristics: informational and psychological stability or instability, instability or turbulence, information and psychological victory or informational and psychological defense. Is that a universal problems that people cannot come to terms? Maybe that's the way things are. Economical and political interests are more important than social and cultural issues. In this political context, mass media also sticks to harsh confrontation as aggressive information influence. They do not see any other ways to encourage people to become winners in the military confrontation. Here I can't agree with the candidate who introduced the index of aggressiveness. This comprises the novelty of the study and allows to more fully analyze relevant data. The candidate provides thorough critical review of political process and trends. And here I'd like to specify that I personally would like to see a more clearly outline the political attitude of Syria in the studies. Because if you regard the conflict in Syria only as a social conflict, is a bit of a lopsided approach. And in future, I would like you to take into account my message and to see their conflict as a clash of geographical and political interests of many parties involved. The recommendations provided by the candidate is an obvious advantage of the study. Traditionally, I'd like to focus on critical remarks and recommendations for future research. Propaganda as an empirical category has to be studied more thoroughly. The question is, how proper is that to use the terms in the study typical for PR? For example, the promotion of political will and a pseudo-event. Journalists may argue with you what is considered a pseudo-event and what is not. What you called pseudo-events, I, as a representative of journalism as a profession, would not describe as a pseudo-event. So that's an issue of some debate. For example, establishing a monument to the deceased doctors in Syria, is that a pseudo-event? Journalism and political power looks a bit broad as a word combination. The object should have been different in my view. Journalism, the journalism of online media. However, that was the candidate's choice. And secondly, the study of the influence of online media on the political process. You should have rewarded that, I suppose, because online media can affect politics, however, not directly, but rather indirectly. In general, my critical remarks do not undermine the general positive impression I had of these cities. And this study makes a contribution towards the development of journalism and political science. The study by Kirill Aksenov is in line with all the requirements set forth in the relevant order of St. Petersburg State University, and Kirill Aksenov can be rewarded the academic degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, specialization 10-0110, journalism. Item 11 was not violated. Now the floor is given to Alevtina Shevchenko. From RADEPA. Dear colleagues, I have looked at the dissertation as a professional who has both practical and theoretical background and experience. The material the candidate focuses on is relevant. The study has enough potential to give rise to debate, publications, and others. When you read it for the first time, is certain uncertainty of the candidate and the secondary nature of his conclusions. However, I see some grassroots of novelty only if you read the dissertation closely. Online media is gaining new qualities these days. Those qualities which traditional journalism has failed to grasp, and maybe what we today refer to as the drawbacks of the dissertation may only be due to the new nature of online media at large. The topic of the dissertation is obviously relevant. Emily Costos has an interesting publication about the power of online media. And if you look at the study from a methodological point of view, you see that the analysis of the online features of online media, then such quality as the ability to inform big audiences, this ability becomes a factor of affecting extreme political processes. The candidate outlines aim and objectives of the study, and step by step achieves the given aim and objectives. The corpus of material is relevant to provide well-substantiated conclusions. The research is credible and accurate due to the conferences and publications of the candidate. The candidate failed, unfortunately, to avoid the mistake so typical for young scholars, because the limits of the object of the study seems too broad. However, the major research question is worded properly. The major research question includes mass media sources which focus on the same topic. The hypothesis the candidate given was provided enough evidence for. Online media focus on the aggressive part of the political subject, which creates an image of an enemy. The methods are used to increase an aggressive attitude. The candidate redefines a number of concepts and includes such new definitions of such events as revolution, rebellion, revolt, uprising, military coup, and others, which is a novelty when it comes to the political process in Syrian Arab Republic. If we have a close look at the analysis of Chapter 2, we will see that there are certain indirect references to Kurt Levin's works and concepts. The results are classified based on the principle of falsification. If we analyze the level of engagement of online media in the Syrian Arab Republic and other indices used by the candidate, they seem pretty relevant as the methodology. The candidate provides recommendations to improve journalistic practices to normalize political processes. This shows that the dissertation is a complete study. However, I should say that recommendations for Russian political actors and Russian media should have been more thorough and particular. The recommendations should also include some efforts that mass media agents should take when it comes to social and public issues. As for research finding about mass media and online mass media is called symbolic power, then much has been said about that. So there is nothing novel about that. In political communication science, a lot of research has been done in this respect, and it doesn't matter that the material of your dissertation is novel. So these routine conclusions found in other works by political scientists undermine the quality of the study. However, there are some other aspects of the study which make it novel and really useful for the political science and journalism. I hope the candidate will answer my questions later during the relevant part of our today's agenda. The candidate should have given the results of his study to a broader range of experts and should have reported the results at a bigger number of events, because here we only see 3 publications in scholarly journals and a small number of conferences. The candidate should include an overview of such Russian political scientists as Lev Smorgonov who is a head of a very influential school of online mass media. Also, the candidate should have focused on the works of Malinova and Solovyov from Moscow School of Symbolic Politics. Despite the disadvantages I have mentioned, the study is efficient and effective for Russian journalism and political science, because these two fields are now in search for tools to decrease social aggressiveness when it comes to international security. I believe that the data obtained due to the political media metrics will be given in monitoring tables when it comes to the studies of international information confrontation in the Middle East. The dissertation is in line with all the requirements set forth in the relevant order of St. Petersburg State University, and Kirill Aksenov can be awarded the degree of the Candidate of Political Sciences. Now the floor is given to Professor Strovsky of the Ariel University, Israel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Much has been said about the study today. I was among the first ones, the early birds, who submitted the report back 2 months ago. I'd like to share my impressions of the study, and it's clear why I would like to do that. I live in Israel, and I'm practically in the middle of this political conflict. Recently, a couple of times, I've been woken up by the explosion of very serious and loud explosions, some 300 kilometers away, and Israel is right in the center of this political, economic, and spiritual uproar. So I'm witnessing all that with my own eyes, and when the question arose whether I would like to have a look at the dissertation, I didn't know the candidate then. I certainly got an interest. When I was reading the study, my mind was stirred. The candidate, of course, deserves the degree. I will not focus on the study as it is. All these pressing issues the candidate raises in his study are of much bigger importance. The word journalism has been used many times today, as well as the word communication, the word information. And I kept focusing as a representative of the old Soviet school. I've been focusing on the question, what kind of information are we dealing with? Is it journalistic information? Then the flow of information has to be analyzed from these bases. If we are dealing with another kind of information, then do we have a right to anyhow judge all these sources of information the author focuses on? Maybe we should be more loyal, more humble towards these sources of information and let them do what they do. No, they do not contribute to the normalization of the process, but they're doing what they're supposed to do, aren't they? They are at the cutting edge of the extreme political process. I fail to understand what kind of information we're dealing with in the study. Once we had a particular understanding of the kind of information we're dealing with, then we could have provided more stringent requirements to the editorial boards of these media. Can we actually apply the term editors and editorial boards to these kind of media which focuses on propaganda? This is the issue that has to be clarified. Otherwise, the study lacks stability. There is one more thing I failed to understand, and let me remind you that I have seen a lot. So, are we really able to speak about the influence of online media? Because the influence implies certain shifts in the consciousness of the audience, and to understand that, we have to conduct opinion polls, qualitative or quantitative research. Obviously, the candidate did not set this objective in his study. He did not show interest in the opinion of the audience. For this reason, can we really speak about the influence? Presumably, another important question arises. Considering current environment, can mass media behave differently? Can we really accuse these media of a behavior that we regard as wrong, as politically biased, as improper? Can we really apply these attributes to mass media? Propaganda is just one aspect of information activity and awareness raising. So can we really blame online media for doing that? Mr. Aksenov failed to explain that. Hence, I have these questions. One more question. Is aggressive behavior of online media against the backdrop of extreme political process universal? Is it common? Or is it only typical for this Middle Eastern conflict we have in mind? There are some other minor questions and issues I have. Dear colleagues, it's not the first time I have a question. What kind of material are we dealing with? Maybe today all these concepts of journalism are not at all important. But if you ask me, I do find them important, because we can't study something without actually specifying what it is that we are studying. So it's not the first time I face this thing, not only here and not only in Russian information space. This is a trend we are witnessing worldwide, called information. What kind of information do we mean? What is it about? Can you specify that? I feel really uncomfortable inside, but maybe I'm just being unfair. And one more thing I'd like to highlight, without going deep into detail. I agree with my colleagues when they say that at times I didn't have enough of the theoretical elaboration. We speak about political processes. Many of you focus today on political process, but I'm talking as a journalist. Nordstrom, Macwell, Tusulu, all of them have visited Russia, but they do clarify what kind of information we're dealing with. However, I failed to see references to their works in Aksenov's study. In general, my critical remarks do not undermine my general positive opinion of the study. The candidate understands the issues thoroughly. He understands what he's writing about. The dissertation has a structure, and I believe that the dissertation is in line with all the major requirements set forth in the relevant orders in Innsbruck State University, and the candidate can be awarded the degree of the Candidate of Political Sciences. However, as I see that, does not anyhow undermine what I have just said today. Thank you, Professor Strovsky. We're coming to the end of this item of the agenda that focuses on the reports on the thesis. Now the floor is given to Professor Blokhin from St. Petersburg State University. So I'm chair of the dissertation board. It's now my turn to provide my report. What makes the study relevant? Three groups of factors. Number one, we have theoretical evidence that shows journalism can affect political processes. Group number two, these are factors that show there is an interrelation between the discussion on the possibilities of mass communication and current political practice. The third group focuses on the radicalization of communicative reactions. That is due to, on the one hand, political efforts and tools, and on the other hand, is of some nature which is elemental. Empirically, the study gives a comprehensive analysis of online media practices against the backdrop of military confrontation and political confrontation in general. All the references and authorship rights are observed properly. All the research findings and recommendations, as well as conclusions, are well substantiated for and accurate. The logic is effective because the structure of the study comes from the general to some particular details. object of the study, its subject and the main research questions are in line with the specialization. The candidate analyzes unplanned and planned activity, analysis of political communication against the backdrop of deficiency of sources, which are the benefits of the study. The empirical data is ample. Another advantage is the comparative aspect. The candidate applies to analyze materials of such agencies and services as Sana, Al Jazeera and BBC. Now I focus on critical remarks. I don't quite like the approach the candidate uses to analyze the war in Syria as a typical conflict in the Middle East. Many analysts spoke about the role of online media to cover the events of the Arabic Spring. Did the online media had the same influence on the intensity and features of the conflict in Syria? The object of the study, journalism and political power, has to be more precise. He should have given some dynamics to this wording. The object should have been worded as a process. Theoretical basis of the study is founded on behavioristic concepts, hence the paradigms of the political process, which we find in the supportive material of the study. The candidate states that the communication approach in the study is a priority over the systems and functional method. However, the analysis of extreme political process depends on the type of political culture of the parties involved, and the type of political culture in its turn defines the type of journalism as one of the channels of communication. Here I mean a social institute that performs its functions, the controlling functions, or under some circumstances political functions. So the author has to balance between functional analysis and the content analysis. On page 66, political functions of online media are already viewed as directions of interaction in information, propaganda, analytical and communication activity. The highlights in the description of novelty should have been different. He should have focused on the unique role of online media in the Middle East confrontation. He should have focused on the different levels, the intra and interstate levels, as well as inter-ethnic, inter-communal, interreligious, and other contradictions. The study has some improper and inaccurate wordings. For example, when evaluating political processes as normal and abnormal. The highlights in the hypothesis should also have been different. We read, online media focuses on information aggression. I would say that online media cannot provide for any type of aggression, can it? The candidate refers to journalism as a political tool, as a subject of policy. On page 18, the candidate defines mass media as a functional subject of politics. However, mass media refers to organizations or other tools, and journalism can be regarded as an institution or a subject. The analysis of conflict in Syria provides additional characteristics for the analysis of the issue of effectiveness of political technology. As practice shows, the use of popular methods of public influence is not effective unless additional tools are used. Every new technology is uncoded at an expert and journalistic levels. So to be successful, it has to be renewed each and every time. That's why the example of Syria is unique, because the major goal, that is ending the current regime, as well as the additional aim, creating chaos, have not been achieved. All the critical remarks I have provided do not undermine the general positive impression I had of the study. And the dissertation by Kirill Aksenov is in line with all the major requirements set forth in the relevant order of St. Petersburg State University, and Kirill Aksenov can be awarded the academic degree, specialization 10-0110 journalism, item 11 of the given order was not violated. Now I'd like the candidate to provide answers to questions and critical remarks. You have 10 minutes only. I'd like to thank members of the dissertation board for their critical remarks. I'll answer them in turn. The first critical remark concerned the novelty when it came to such concepts as revolution, rebellion, revolt, uprising as types of political processes. When it comes to the novelty of these concepts, is that I analyze them as a set comprehensively, which I failed to find in prior scholarly works. Evidence can be found on pages from 32 to 35. When further elaborating this topic, I will keep in mind this critical remark that you had. As for your second critical remark, the remark about the particular online sources I chose. I am to focus on the Middle East online sources. My attention to Al Jazeera was due to my interest in it, because the attitudes to these online media are different. However, it is obviously influential. As for the difference in the number of materials I analyzed, and these are materials in the Arabic language and in English, BBC simply less often covered the extreme political process, unlike, say, Sana. In the end, BBC has other issues to focus on, issues in Britain and in Western Europe, in the West in general. I was interested in Al Jazeera's position regarding the Russian Federation when it comes to the Syrian issue. As for Russian online media, I'll focus that in my future study, and I'd like to thank you for this critical remark. As for the methodology of calculating the index of aggressiveness, you could find it in my dissertation. We applied Igor Nikolaevich approach to calculate the index of aggressiveness. That is based on qualitative and quantitative content analysis, which requires to identify neutral and negative materials. The index is calculated through the correlation between the number of neutral materials and aggressive materials. As for other works on my topic by Russian and Western scholars, which I have done to a big extent, I really insist on the conclusion that online mass media can contribute to the normalization of political process. I do accept that it is necessary to conduct interviews with Russian and international journalists who have expertise in covering confrontations and extreme political processes. Propaganda requires more study, considering current information environment. The methods of information and psychological influence often intervene, and I have to take that into account during my future studies. As for the terminology, the terms pseudo-event and political willpower, I'd like to justify the use of these terms. Mine uses the term pseudo-event when he describes politics in Germany. He says, what used to be called politics, not a discussion, is more and more often referred to as some symbolic action. These are pseudo-events, and they take place only because there is someone talking about them. I found this term attractive and appropriate considering the context it was used in. When it comes to the monument, is it a pseudo-event or not is a point of debate. On the one hand, it is a pseudo-event. On the other hand, it isn't. Does it take away the reader's attention from some other more serious issues? I thought that it did. As for the term political willpower, I find that it is possible to use this term. Politicians, if they're supported by online media, take actions to implement what they would like to implement. Political willpower is imposing your will on other actors. So I found this term appropriate. Another question that several members of the dissertation board asked was about the inaccurate wording of the object of my study. I'd like to thank you for this critical remark, and I accept that. Initially, I was going to focus on online media as a subject, as an object of my study. However, some experts criticized my decision based on your comments, my search for the new wording was not successful. Another critical remark by Professor Shevchenko. The remark concerned lack of substantiation and fairness, typical for modern journalism. You also asked the category of symbolic power. The category of symbolic power is not central to my study. However, it is really critical so that the study does not give an impression. Here I mean the title of my study, the topic of my study, and titles of the chapters of my study, that mass media really makes a difference. No, I insist on that their power is only symbolic. As for the lack of proper substantiation and unfairness of modern mass media, what I meant to say is that what has become common for most politicians, they will often make statements about their enemies, their online enemies. And this has given rise to dramatization. This very often makes the whole story even more difficult, and this happens very often. As I said, many of the BBC materials would often base themselves on online posts on social media. Very often mass media replace fact with fiction, over-exaggerating or distorting what really happened. Russia would often be found guilty for what it hasn't actually done due to certain distortion of information. As for critical remark number 2, regarding the testing of my research results, I accept that critical remark because the study is complex and multifaceted. I'm going to continue my scholarly efforts in this direction and will keep in mind your recommendations. Now I'd like to answer the questions of Professor Strovsky. As for information and psychological influence, the remark concerned the following. Should we call this journalism? I believe that when it comes to political and information and psychological influence, to be more precise, that's the issue we're facing. It's not only effective or connotative impact. At the backdrop of extreme political process, we are moving a step forward. It's not something that does not concern us at all, and something that we are observing from the distance. It is something that we are facing here and now. One more question about the influence and involvement. The influence on the audience has to be studied separately and step by step. My study focused rather on the influence of political processes, actions of politicians. We find that in the theoretical as well as the practical part of my study. We also focused on the influence of politicians of journalism. We speak about the engagement of online mass media in extreme political processes. This creates surge of aggressiveness. I specify that the involvement would have been bigger if journalists provided more analytical materials and did not focus on the aggression and negativism only. Within the framework of my study, I can answer some questions only hypothetically. For example, is aggressive behavior of mass media common for extreme political processes, whatever part of the world we take, or is it only typical for the conflict on our today's agenda? I believe that to provide a more effective answer to this question, I should have followed the recommendation of Professor Bykov and focus on Russian online media. Can the behavior of online mass media be different in another political environment? Considering the sources I analyzed, it couldn't be different, because what I have witnessed is their dependence on the political will of politicians, political parties involved and concerned. Journalists never make a random choice. Their information aggressiveness that we have been witnessing for a few months shows that the rise of aggressiveness indicate that there has been some actions of the opposing party, but also by certain political events and actions which I suppose are even conducted by them on purpose. Furthermore, just a second, I cannot, let me concentrate. I'm sorry, I couldn't finish what I was trying to say. Sorry for that. Now let's turn to Professor Bohin's critical remarks. The confrontation between the power and the opposition is pretty typical. You can find that on several pages of the study. Along with that, your critical remark is certainly crucial for my further research and for the comparative studies on the role of online media when it comes to extreme political processes. The use of social networks so far has not been typical as source of factual information for other media sources. And I believe that during extreme political processes, the use of these materials, unfortunately, will become common. It is getting more and more common, even for normal political processes. I focused more on behavioristic concepts. However, I also resorted to the functional methods. I agree that I should have explained my methodology more thoroughly. I accept that. Journalists have been saying that very often journalistic processes often reappear when negotiations begin. So considering these, the novelty of my study could have been broadened. To understand what's made by normal and abnormal political processes, refer to the relevant pages of the study. As for information aggression, here I meant that the online media in question do not analyze possible ways to bring an end to the confrontation. Why did I choose the particular sources of material? Not only BBC. I wanted to become more or less impartial. As for the online media, I define them as a subject of policy based on the definition provided by Alexander Solovyov. On page 16, we find the subject of policy is any actor who interacts with the state and can influence the decision-making processes. So online media can be regarded as a political subject. Online media really take place in this interaction of power with the state. We can also refer to online media as a tool of political power. When it comes to other critical remarks, I accept all of them. I would once again thank distinguished members of the board for their critical remarks. Now I would like the non-board members to share their opinions or give questions to the candidate. I don't see anyone willing to take the floor. Now let's take the next item on our agenda, and the floor is given to the thesis supervisor of Professor Labushev of St. Petersburg State University. You have 3 minutes. Distinguished members of the board, chair, dear attendees. I'd like to focus on some biographic points of Mr. Aksenov. He was enrolled on the bachelor's program of St. Petersburg State University. His final paper was devoted to the role of a newspaper in regulating and covering the conflict in Abkhazia. Then he was enrolled on the master's program in international journalism. His master's thesis focused on online journalism, on sports online journalism. Then he enrolls on the postgraduate program. During his training, he passed all the necessary qualifying exams published the required number of articles in peer-reviewed journals approved by the Ministry of Science. His first publication was about the index of aggressiveness. He also wrote about the role of online media in extreme political processes. He participated in the conferences hosted by the School of Journalism of St. Petersburg University. He has revealed himself as a successful postgraduate student. Upon the completion of the study, Kirill Aksenov continued his scholarly efforts, scientific efforts. He also started teaching. He's a thoughtful and a creative scholar. He's very hardworking. As you can see, the candidate has made a long way to be standing here today, and I hope that his defense today will be successful. Kirill Aksenov is an independent scholar with good critical and analytical skills. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Labush. Now, I would like you to switch off the broadcast. I would like the attendees and non-members to leave the hall. It will not take a long time. I will invite you to return back to the hall once we finish the discussion. Thank you.
Так, уважаемые коллеги, переходим к открытому голосованию.
Dear colleagues, our panel discussion is on. Please switch on the broadcast. I put to the vote the issue of conferring the academic degree. Let me remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Board on conferring the academic degree is positive, provided it has received 50% of the votes from no fewer than 3 members of the Dissertation Board. This is in conformity with item 23 of the Order on Granting Academic Degrees at St. Petersburg University. Member of the Dissertation Board, Professor Bykov, what is your opinion? I'm voting for conferring the academic degree to Kirill Aksenov. Yuri Kluyev, what is your opinion? Kirill Aksenov can be granted the academic degree of the Candidate of Political Sciences, specialization journalism. I'm voting for. Member of the Dissertation Board, Alevtina Shevchenko, what is your opinion? I stick to the opinion I had in my report. I'm voting for. Professor Strovsky, what's your opinion? I'm voting for. Thank you. I'm chair of the Dissertation Board. My name is Igor Ibrahim. I'm voting for conferring the academic degree. Dear colleagues and attendees, let me announce that 5 out of 5 members of the board have voted for conferring the academic degree of the Candidate of Political Sciences. We do not have anyone who voted against or decided not to vote. Kirill Aksenov Kirill Aksenov is awarded the degree of the Candidate of Political Sciences. My congratulations, Mr. Aksenov. I would like to extend my congratulations to friends and family of Mr. Aksenov. I'd like to also congratulate Professor Labush as his supervisor, as well as the relevant department of the School of Journalism. Now the floor is given to Kirill Aksenov for his closing speech. It has been a long way. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Higher School of Journalism and Mass Communications, the Department of International Journalism, for their efforts. I'd like to thank my dissertation supervisor, Nikolai Labush, who was on the review board of my graduation paper when I was in the bachelor program. He was really harsh with his criticism, but I'm thankful for that. I would like to thank all the professors who became members of the expert council and for their valuable critical remarks. I would like to thank members of the dissertation board, its chair, and all the members for the time and attention you gave to my study. Thank you for critical remarks and recommendations. Thank you. I would like to thank the members of the dissertation board who has been able to make a trip to St. Petersburg and take part in our today's panel session. I am now closing the panel session of the dissertation board. Please switch off the broadcast.